Good evening. I'm Paul Fredette, and with me here is my wife, Karen, and together we minister to hermits and to religious solitaries throughout the world through Raven's Bread Ministries, here from our home in the mountains of western North Carolina. We want to thank you all for joining us once again this evening, and we want to welcome any viewers who might be tuning in for the first time. Over the past several weeks, we've been focusing on the essential features and some of the other aspects that are basic to hermit life, especially as we've come to recognize it in the resurgence of hermit life over the past 50, 60 years in the Western world. Last week, we tried to focus on some of the helps and hazards about eremitic life. We noted especially the need for spiritual guidance, both for discernment, serious discernment, as well as for accountability. We talked especially about one of the greater hazards, and that's a condition that the ancient fathers and mothers called acedia, a kind of low-level depression that gradually comes about really due to a failure to give oneself totally to the life. And so it's always an uphill struggle, and most of the contentment and the joy that should be part of the life is no longer there. Tonight we'd like to continue a little bit more down that same road of the helps and hazards and some of the problems. And Karen and I have come to talk about these things as the big D's. But that always, whenever I say that phrase, it makes me recall, and I'm dating myself here, one of the American television shows that aired during the late 60s and early 70s. It was a variety show that had as its theme the country, rural, southern culture of the United States and the mountain culture, and it was a series of songs and comedy sketches. One of the comedy songs, the comedic songs that they did very frequently and which caught on and became a staple for quite a while, was a song that featured four entertainers, male entertainers, sitting on the porch of a broken-down cabin set in stereotypical Appalachian dress, complete with the jug of moonshine on their laps. And they sang a song, the refrain of which went, "Gloom, despair, agony on me, deep, dark depression and excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me." Of course, it was hilarious, and it made it even funnier that there was a lot of howling going on, especially from the hound dog, a live hound dog that was there on the set with them, who would interrupt the sound with his baying every once in a while. We have our 4Ds too. They're not nearly as hilarious, and they do tend to plague most hermits from time to time. Karen?
Yes. First of all, I'll say I don't remember seeing that.
Of course you don't.
No. It was before my time, of course. But I do like the idea of clustering some problems to make them more memorable by calling them the 4Ds. Solitude has these inherent dangers. And in the past ages with the hermit fathers and mothers, they would have been called demons or devils. But we named them despair, doubt, deception, discouragement, just to name four of the more obvious ones. And by our choice of solitude, we've given up having sympathetic help always close at hand.
Mm-hmm.
So what is required of the hermit is to have some big C's. And among them are character, confidence, creativity, as well as the contemplative spirit, all of which are necessary if we are going to overcome these temptations.
And speaking of temptations, there are a lot of people who would love to ask hermits about sex. They seldom get the opportunity, and even when they do, it's rare that people can summon up the courage to ask questions like, do you miss it? How do you deal with desires for sexual relations? And doesn't solitude make you even easier prey to sexual temptations? It'd be simple, true, but simple, to simply say that divine providence offers one the grace to continue in the state of life that one has chosen. But really, this is dodging the issue. What does one do when these issues surface in eremitic life? And it's naive to assume that they won't, at least for the majority of people. Ideally, we believe that the wise solitary will take preemptive steps by limiting their exposure to the subtle as well as to the blatant messages carried in the media. Advertisements, news stories, songs, music, as well as most of the entertainment in the media today intentionally create images that we react to without even intentionally willing it. We're told by just about everyone in media and entertainment that sexual activity is that living a life without sexual activity is nearly impossible and definitely abnormal. And all of the books and the websites and everything else tell both men and women how to maintain their health and their vigor by engaging in sexual relations frequently with or without a partner. How individual hermits will deal with these needs depends on their age, on the urgency of their passions, and on their personal beliefs about chastity. But most people who have chosen solitary life have also assessed their ability to live without sexual activity. Now, when we consider married hermits, and admittedly they are rare, but they are also not unheard of. The propriety of sexual relations is open to discussion, and it depends on the desires of the couple. Conjugal love is normally expressed sexually, so it's not unthinkable that hermits may wish to continue this dimension of their marriage as one aspect of their eremitic life. Again, this is rare, but it can be a very beautiful state of life where physical affection and spiritual love sustain one another. Each couple has their own path to walk, and the decision whether or not to include sexual activity within their hermit calling requires a mutually honest and respectful discernment. The fact is that most hermits are solitaries, so the resolution of sexual temptations is dealt with knowing that interpersonal sex is not part of their vocation. Of course, knowing this and living this are two very different things. Many hermits who admit to having problems with sex are oftentimes actually talking about loneliness or the need for companionship and love. Once again, if someone has found a convincing reason to sacrifice the fulfillment of this desire, it is possible to overcome its urgency. As a person spends more and more time in their hermitage, these cravings normally diminish, even though they may never go away completely or forever. There'll always be those gray days when loneliness and or sexual needs impinge on a person's contentment. This is the time when we have to draw on one of those pages from the big book of AA and endure the struggle 1 hour at a time. One may also have a friend on whom one can call when one needs a sympathetic ear or a helping hand. More and more we learn that experience and patience help us to live through these tough times. And gradually, if a person guards against undue exposure to suggestive situations, sexual temptations will be no more than a passing distress.
Passing distresses turn up in other forms as well. Doubt and discouragement, though they're not exactly the same thing, often come knocking on a hermit's door hand in hand. And one of the questions that always engenders doubt is the, am I sure that eremitical life is God's will for me? The simple answer is, we can't be sure. Certitude is not one of the gifts that God gives to hermits, nor to anyone else as a rule. In this regard, I was very impressed when reading the autobiography of a young woman who is bedfast with severe rheumatoid arthritis. And she was speaking with her spiritual confessor and said how she envied his certitude of his vocation, ensured as it was by the laying on of the bishop's hands. Gently, the priest reminded her that not all priests and religious remained in their vocations, which they had initially embraced with what they thought was absolute certitude. And he pointed out that she, with her calling, as it were, to chronic illness, was more certain of her calling from God than almost anyone else in the world. Mm-hmm. Certitude is something that we cannot count on. And in fact, the only kind of assurance that we come across for hermit life or any other vocation is a sort of negative certitude, which means if there is no compelling reason to do something else, and it's not just a passing question, if there's no compelling reason to do something else, then you stay where you are. You are where God wants you to be. As someone who has lived through 4 lifestyles, all of which were seamed together by my desire to seek God's will more and more, I know that lacking certitude is just part of the human condition. All I could earnestly do when a question arose was to use the tools of discernment that God lays open to every one of us, and trust in God's mercy, that He will guide my stumbling feet. And if I feel that there are indicators, clear ones, certain ones, that the Spirit is leading me elsewhere, then I pray for the courage to follow it. And if I do somehow end up on the wrong path, I pray for the gift that my daddy often promised us, which was a good swift kick in the seat of the pants, this time from God. The older hermits used to say about things like this, When we are tested, we are more humbled, for God knows our weakness and protects us. Yet, if we boast, God takes his protection away from us, and then we are really lost.
Well, while many hermits are wrestling with doubt, they usually also engaged in trying to overcome discouragement. And for hermits, one of the greatest sources of discouragement is something that we focused on a little bit last week. It's the sheer nothingness that their life appears to produce. They're not achieving anything. They're not getting anywhere. Remember, we talked about how Thomas Merton was commenting on the lives of some of the Cistercian hermits, and especially the life of Blessed Conrad, who just, his whole life didn't just seem to make much sense or have any point at all. And Merton said he died and his life was like it had ended in mid-sentence. No punctuation, nothing. And oftentimes, it's really not easy or pleasant to look back on the years with nothing to show for them except one's own survival. This is the temptation that really cuts to the chase and cross-examines our reasons for becoming hermits in the first place. If our purpose in becoming a hermit is to allow God to use us for his saving purposes, then we also should not be expecting tangible fruits. If we're engaged in spiritual work, then the results will be in the same realm. Among the sayings of the Desert Fathers, we find this one. Abbot Isidore of Pelusia said, "Living without speaking is better than speaking without living. For a person who lives rightly helps us by his silence, while one who talks too much merely annoys us. If, however, words and life go hand in hand, it is the perfection of all philosophy." This kind of silence that we're referring to is the equivalent of the nothingness that plagues the hermit, especially one who is raised in a culture, as most of us are these days, where the product is all that matters of a person's life. It is the measure of our life. You have nothing to say. You have nothing to show for all those years. What a shame. Even more, what a waste. Particularly when the hermit may be a gifted and or well-trained person with, quote-unquote, so much to offer the world. The solitary really has to learn to disregard those questions for which the interrogator has obviously found a ready answer. All that the hermit needs do is to guard against allowing those kinds of intrusions to become doubts that disturb their peace or their contentment. It used to be when aspiring hermits or people early in hermit life would write to us, Karen and I would wonder sometimes. Their letters were full of all of the details of becoming a hermit, but they said very, very little about the why. We wondered at this initially, but over time we've come to understand that it's because the why is extremely hard to express in words, and it's also deeply personal. Matters of appropriate food, clothing, shelter, they're much easier to discuss, and they have their value, since becoming hermits doesn't automatically make us angels. And there's certainly a bout of discouragement that is proof enough of this.
Yes, we've never heard yet of a discouraged angel, or of any of them having to deal with the big D's. Another of which is self-deception. Initially, one might think that self-deception would be an easy one to get away with in the hermit life, since there are none of those automatic corrections that come from having people right at hand to point them out to you, that you're not just living what you said you were. Actually, except in the case of mental illness, it is very difficult to persist in lying to oneself when living alone, because you become exquisitely attentive to the conflicts, the inner conflicts that happen when the desires of our hearts and the thoughts of our minds conflict. And you know it. There is an uneasiness that you cannot ignore, because there's so much silence and nothing else to distract you from it. It's like a splinter or something that thorn that slips under your skin, and in a couple days begins to fester. And you know if you ignore it, you risk losing a finger or a toe. You've got to do something about it. It's really live in the truth or lose it. Self-deception is not an enduring option.
No.
Laura Swan, who wrote the wonderful book, The Forgotten Desert Mothers, offers this story about Amma Theodora, who said, "There was an ascetic who, because of the great number of personal temptations, said, 'I will go away from here.' While putting on her sandals, she saw another ascetic who was also putting on sandals. This other ascetic said, 'Is it on my account that you are going away? Spare yourself, because I go before you wherever you are going.'" In other words, wherever we flee, we will always meet ourselves. It is pointless to run from difficult situations. They usually just run with us, since we ourselves are most often our greatest difficulty.
Yeah. Well, by the time a person has made the decision, actually made the decision, to follow a call to eremitic life, they've no doubt pondered the scriptural injunction that we used for the title of this book. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither cellar nor barn. Yet God feeds them. How much more important you are than these? If the smallest things are beyond your power, why be anxious about the rest? Thomas Merton tried to describe or define the essence of monasticism as life without care. Now, by that, he didn't mean life without caring. He meant life without anxiety, life without worry. And he regularly, in his talks to his novices, had them in laughter describing the actually rather silly things that most of the monks manufactured to worry about, like feeding the rabbits, who are notorious for nibbling on just about anything, or worrying about what would happen if the choir leader caught cold and was not available when there were 10 other trained alternates to take the choir leader's place. All this worry existed in a community where the monks' every physical need had guaranteed coverage. Well, hermits too must learn to lead lives without care. In fact, You might say that unless a hermit masters this particular art, living without care, they won't really last very long in a life where security is not on the list of guarantees.
No.
A genuine hermit really finds a certain thrill in living on the edge, because it's at the edge, not for its own sake, it's at the edge that one discovers how amazingly God can provide for them, if we give God the chance.
If we give him the chance.
Yeah, yes, that's a big if. The secret to funding, not founding, but funding a life without care, though, is refusing to buy into the myth, so prevalent today, that material goods will assure security. As a matter of fact, when we really consider it, stocks and bonds, investments, buildings, properties, titles, jobs, all of these things generate far more insecurity than anything else in this world.
They do.
The scriptural passage that immediately precedes the admonition to consider the ravens is the parable of the wealthy farmer who discovered such an abundant harvest that he decided to tear down his existing barns and build bigger and better ones to accommodate the abundant harvest he had. He had barely implemented this plan, however, when God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be required of you." The wealthy farmer had forgotten that security meant more than filled barns. He had also forgotten the empty barns of his neighbors just across his property line. Hermits living without care have to take the risk of turning all their concerns over to God, who has proverbially the deepest pockets. As long as we're satisfied with a sufficiency, as St. Paul says, we will always have enough. Now, the quote-unquote enough that God provides might not match what the Madison ad people say we need, but it will be more than adequate for our own peace and, more importantly, our joy.
Learning to live with sufficiency and being leads to a profound contentment. Even on a very material level, as finding an appropriate hermitage, we've noticed that anyone who's approached us with that question in mind eventually does find the place that they need. It doesn't mean that they are going to end up in a broken down hut in the wilderness or end up living in a damp cave somewhere. Hermits normally don't end up living under bridges or dwelling in a cardboard box over a vent on the sidewalk. But many do live hidden in government housing or in a single wide that's set off the beaten track. On occasion, we've heard from some hermits who built their own, gifted hermit who built his own hermitage from bits and pieces of other houses that were being torn down and were given to him for the price of hauling them away.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of talented people, many of our hermit solitaries are gifted artists or craftspeople, but they realize that very soon that that is seldom a source for much income. It does provide profit is a bonus. What this does provide is sharing in God's delight in creation. when he created a world that he pronounced very good. The hermit, by their artistic works, can share in that joy of producing something that they too can call very good. Abba Elias said it very wonderfully. He said, "Unless the mind sings with the body, the labor is in vain."
Well said.
The contemporary revival of one of the earliest forms of religious life is still drawing on the timeless wisdom of the desert Abbas and Ammas from the 3rd and 4th century. And one of them, Abba Benjamin, taught his sons and all of us when he was dying. He said, "Do this, and you will be saved. Rejoice always, pray constantly, and in all circumstances give thanks." And how does one learn to rejoice always? Abba Nelius said, "Do not want things to turn out as they seem best to you, but as God pleases. Then you will be free of confusion and thankful in your prayer." More than one potential hermit has written to us in distress. The only valid economic system they wish to embrace is the one that we learned about 20 centuries ago, which begins, "Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap." And what most impressed them is the final statement, "Your Father knows you need all these things." So he will provide for us, but he does not want us to worry how he will provide for us. The other scriptural injunction, which is crucial to living a life without care, is the reminder that no one can serve two masters. We are meant to live in trusting simplicity to our one God, focused only on one master, one goal, one purpose. Amma Synclectica understood this when she advised her followers, quote, "There are many who live in the mountains and behave as if they were in the town, and they are wasting their time. It is possible to be a solitary in one's mind while living in a crowd, and it is possible for one who is solitary to live in a crowd of personal thoughts."
Yeah, and the most enticing crowd of personal thoughts that we have is usually the worries about our personal welfare, both spiritual and physical. Once we set our focus, though, on the one thing necessary, the ideal rhythm for ora et labora, work and prayer, is gradually revealed of itself. The surefire plan is to put our spiritual obligations in the first place, relegating work to whatever time is left. By keeping first things first, we prepared by our prayer life to find the work that will not only be compatible with our hermetic aspirations, but which will supply us with the necessary income. Not too little, not too much, just that golden mean of sufficiency, which God's servants are supposed to be content with. Although our prayer life is our primary task, for those who tend toward scrupulosity, probably it's good to be reminded that prayer doesn't take up most of the day, even though it's primary. For most of us, work of one kind or another will consume most of the hours of the day. After a few years of solitude, though, ordinarily, hermits find that the work and the prayer flow together seamlessly, in a gentle pattern. The prayer continues as we work, and our work becomes an expression of our communion with God. It's possible that an individual hermit might be able to earn their sufficiency by weaving baskets, as did the early church fathers and mothers. It's possible. It's not very likely.
No.
Hermits will always, though, be adequately provided for if they learn how to weave trust in divine providence into a life without care. Always open to receive whatever is given, and also to give away whatever has been received. Hermits aren't hoarders. And so when someone in need knocks on the door, we should be ready to share whatever we have, how little it may be. We'll close this evening with this following episode from the lives of the Desert Fathers that demonstrate this giving when there's so little to give left. And it really illustrates how we must always begin anew, and that God provides for those who are really willing to risk personal loss in order to care for a brother or sister. The story goes like this, that Abba Moses of Sketis, that after he had arranged to travel to Petra, that city made of all that rock in the Middle East, he got tired in the course of his journey, and he started to fret to himself, saying, "How can I ever find enough water that I'll need over there?" When a voice said to him, "Go and don't be anxious about anything." So Moses went. And eventually, some of the fathers, the elders in the area, came to see him. And he had only a small bottle of water. And he used it all up cooking lentils for them. So now the old man grew even more worried. He paced in and out of his cell, praying to God. And before long, a cloud of rain came to Petra, and it filled up all of the cisterns. So after this, his company of visitors said to him, "Tell us what all that was about, this going in and out of your cell." And the old man said to them, "I was arguing with God. I said to him, 'You brought me here, and now I have no water to give your servants.' That's why I was going in and out," he said. "I was going on at God until he sent some water." It seems that even the most experienced hermits also have their moments when their trust is tried to the limit. But apparently, arguing with God, who appeared to ask more of us than we had to give, can be an approved form of prayer under these circumstances.
Any prayer that turns us to God can be a good prayer. Even a little argument from time to time. And now we're going to reconsider the prayer services that we've been having towards the end of our discussions together. And those of you who were with us last week, we went through a guided imagery experience where we asked you, first of all, and I'll ask you again, to relax, to remember to sit back, breathe deeply, kick off your shoes if you wish, breathe gently, wiggle your toes, allow yourself to feel relaxation throughout your whole body. And as you do this, perhaps you can picture again the image that we had of going with some friends to camp in the wilderness, and as your camp was being set up, you saw a path leading up the nearby mountainside and started up that path alone. After you had gotten a certain distance up the path, you suddenly remembered that you had forgotten something important. Go back now, if you were with us last week, and remember, what did you forget? How important was that for you? Some have said that they forgot a canteen for water and immediately felt thirsty. And perhaps they just stayed thirsty, blaming themselves for being so stupid, or blaming their friends for not having warned them to bring their canteen with them. Or, as one of them said, they found a stream and took up care of their thirst that way. Oftentimes people say they forgot a flashlight and just hope they won't need one. Others, because of their climbing experience, name ropes and cleats. And rather than go back, they say that they just hope they won't need those either. One man did go back to get them, though. Another person said she forgot her sweater, and then she just decided she'd walk faster and generate some heat that way. The important thing here is not what you forgot, but how you reacted to the oversight. Did you accept responsibility for it? Or did you blame your friends for not having taken care of you? Or perhaps you made a big fuss with yourself, not accepting your own limitation and mistake. The other important factor here is what you did about the forgotten object. Could you reasonably go on without it? If so, did you go back anyway, because you are just a very cautious person? If not, did you go on being a bit rash? Or perhaps you found another way to deal with the situation. Just remember how you dealt with the difficulty of your own forgetfulness. And then there was that challenge, that mountain goat that we met on the path. A narrow path, and he was blocking our path. We were in his territory. How did you get past him? We learned that one athletic young man grabbed the goat by the horns, gave a mighty twist, and hurled him off into space. As it turns out, that's about what he does with anything that has the misfortune of getting in his way. One girl, a rather sturdy one, kept her eye on the goat and used her climbing equipment to scale the wall above him and get past him. One woman faced the goat, and told him she had to keep going. And when the goat didn't move, she scolded him and just simply pushed him backwards along the path until it was wide enough. What was the goat doing? We asked. She said it was glaring at me, but it was moving. Then she sort of giggled because she realized, oh, he looks like somebody I often treat that way. Another person chose to feed the goat. Still another tried scaring him away. One of them decided to form a partnership with the goat and said, please, Mr. Goat, if you let me pass, I'll share with you whatever I have. Some people tried persuasion. One youngster we heard of actually got on the goat's back and rode him up the top of the mountain. And at the top of the mountain, we found a cave. Visualize that cave you found again. Remember it. What was the inside of your cave like? For one man, it was just a cave, you know, rocks and dirt and animal droppings. And that is all he found, he said, except for his name like graffiti on the wall. In contrast, another person found stalactites and stalagmites and all those beautiful things that can be found in these huge underground caverns. One girl found something that gave contest to Alibaba's cave. It was bright, full of lights, treasures, and a glittering stone which was shaped like a unicorn, and pleased her immensely because she loved unicorns. One woman said she found a white leather-covered Bible with her name written on it. And as she stood there with it in her hand, she felt like maybe I should be spending more time with God's Word. One man found a box of tools, also with his name on it. And it was an answer to a question he was hardly considering. That settles it, he said. I am going to take those carpentry classes that I have been putting off. What did you find? What might it mean to you? And this is important. What does it show you about your expectations? Rocks, dirt, animal droppings? Or something good? Something interesting? Something contributing to your well-being? What are your expectations in an uncertain situation? And how willing are you to accept an unexpected gift? It's so much easier to give than to receive. But there are times when something comes to us with our name on it, and we need to accept it.
From Psalm 46. God is our shelter and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not be afraid. Though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with the shaking, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the dwelling place of the eternal. The Holy One is in the midst of the city. It shall not be forsaken. The Holy One will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in an uproar. Kingdoms totter. God speaks, and earth's powers melt away. The Almighty, the Heavenly One, is present on earth. The One who was in the beginning is now. Come and see the works of God. Look at how the mighty are brought down. The Holy One makes wars come to an end throughout the world. The bow is broken, and the spear is shattered. The sword and shield are burned with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am loved among the nations. I am loved throughout the earth. The God of heaven is present on earth. The One who was in the beginning is now. Now, in the silence of our hearts, or in whatever way our spirit is moved, let's give thanks for the gift that this day has been, and pray for the life of the world. For your spirit, woven into the fabric of creation, for the eternal, overlapping with time, and the life of earth interlaced with heaven's vitality, we give you thanks, Most High. For your untamed creativity, your boundless mystery, and your passionate yearnings. planted deep in the soul of every human being, we give you thanks. Grant us the grace this night to reclaim these depths, to uncover these treasures, to liberate these longings, and in being set free in our own spirits, to act for the well-being of the world. Before we close our prayer this evening, we just want to thank each one of you again for joining with us. We want to thank all of those who continue to help this poor benighted soul who is so inept when it comes to technology in trying to get these broadcasts up to snuff, as we say. Thank you so much for your patience and your help.
We also want to thank St. Clare of Assisi. Most people may not be aware, but she is the patroness of television, and I think virtual television would come in.
I think that comes under that same classification.
Let's hope.
If you wish to get in touch with us with suggestions for topics that we could pursue during these programs at greater length, feel free to email us at pkfredette@frontier.com. That's all run together, no spaces, all lowercase. Or you can contact us on the contact page of our website, ravensbreadministries.com. We pray as we close this evening, O Brother Jesus, who wept at the death of a friend and overturned tables in anger at wrong, let us not be frightened by the depths of passion. Rather, let us learn the love and anger and the wild expanses of the soul that is within us, that are true expressions of your grace and your wisdom. And assure us again that in becoming more like you, we become closer to our true selves, made in the image of outpouring love, and born of the free, eternal wind. The blessings of heaven, the blessings of earth, the blessings of sea and of sky, on those we love this night, and on every human family, the gifts of heaven, the gifts of earth, the gifts of sea and sky. Once again, thank you all. God bless you, and good night.
God be with you.